Hey YouTube, this is my second video today. I am doing the environment tag, which was started by Travis at the Pagan Scholar channel. I'm really excited about this tag because it's a great idea, so a quick shout out to him. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Number one, what does the wheel of the year look like to you from where you live? So first of all, I have to give a little caveat that as far as the wheel of the year is concerned, and the specific holidays like Beltane and Lugnasa and all that stuff, I don't really use that vocabulary. I mostly focus on just the solstices and the equinoxes. And the seasons themselves. Equinoxes. Is that how you pluralize that? Anyway, so I'm just going to focus more on that. I'm kind of in the interesting situation as far as where I live because I've lived in so many places and I still kind of live in two places at once. I've was born on a military base in Germany, so it snowed a lot in the winter. Then we moved to the panhandle of Florida, and it would barely get under 40 degrees in the winter. And then I moved to Kentucky, and in Kentucky the four seasons are pretty laid out. They're pretty obvious. There is a clear winter, a clear spring, and a clear summer and all that. Then I went to college in Tennessee, kind of the same thing in Kentucky. Then I went to grad school in Georgia. Not much of a winter here, like people freak out if it snows 3 inches. And now I'm in a PhD program in Massachusetts. So when I talk about winter, I'm definitely going to mention Massachusetts, especially this last winter that we had. So right now I'm in Georgia. I spend the summers in Georgia. With my husband because he's down here finishing up his PhD. But actually next week I'm flying back up to Massachusetts because I spend the academic year up there. So I'm gonna focus just on Georgia and Massachusetts as far as my description of the seasons and how I relate to them, I guess. So let's start with the summer. You know, in Kentucky, I grew up mostly in Kentucky. I spent most of my childhood in Kentucky, so, you know, it gets hot in the 90s and humid. So I thought moving to Georgia that I could handle it. At first, it was just overwhelming. Like, I would walk out to my mailbox and feel sweat going down my back. Now I'm more used to it, but the level of humidity is intense. And because in general there's a larger chunk of the year that's hot, in Georgia the growing season down here is longer, so that kind of shifts how you view like how the seasons line up with agriculture and harvesting. And maybe I'm going to branch out into spring and fall now. So like in Kentucky you can't really put your younger plants in the ground until April, but in Georgia you can start planting in early March. But in Massachusetts in March, in spring, around the spring equinox, it could still be 30 degrees outside. So I'm kind of working, you know, up and down the East Coast now. So summer, fall, I love fall. It is my favorite season. Most of the witches on YouTube I've watched actually love fall. And as far as my practice, I understand how Samhain, that time of the year, or Halloween, how Samhain and Beltane, how the whole, you know, the veil is thinner during those times of year. I understand that because it is a transitional period. I think of in my practice, I focus a lot on dualities, and I I've recently discovered that there's a name to what I want to do. It's edge witchery or liminal witchery or liminal magic. I like to call it border magic. And so if you work with dualities, then you have the space in between, right? And that just fascinates me. Even I incorporate that in my academic work. So the duality that I think of is, of course, the winter and summer solstice. So that would make the spring, ooh, there's a thunderstorm outside, the spring and the fall, especially around the time of the equinox, but also including like Samhain and Beltane time, those transitional periods, just like death is a transition. Maybe that's why the idea of like the veil between the worlds is thinner at those times. Maybe that's why that idea came about, right? So that kind of covers number one, and I guess as I go through the questions, I'll keep jumping back and forth and explaining more as I go. Number two, how has the environment changed from your memories of it in the past? And I kind of touched on that already, saying how, you know, for a few years when I was really young, like between the ages of 3 and 5 or 6, we lived on the panhandle of Florida. So I didn't experience snow. The winter solstice didn't feel as wintry as it does now that I live in Massachusetts during the winter time. So yeah, I guess just because I've lived in so many places on the East Coast and for a few years in Germany, but I don't really remember that. I was born there, but we moved to Florida when I was like 2.5 or 3, so it barely counts. Yeah, like going back to the duality idea, I've always really connected with the winter solstice. So maybe this kind of leaks into number 3. What is your favorite holiday in the Wheel of the Year, and does it differ from typical descriptions found in books? I don't know about the second part of that question, but my favorite holiday is the winter solstice, and there's kind of 2 reasons behind that. The first being my birthday is on the winter solstice. I was born on December 21st. It was a Monday, and it was a new moon. So there's all that kind of symbolism and significance behind that. So I've always been really attached to the fact that my birthday is the winter solstice. And now even more so because, and this is the second reason, because the winter solstice is part of that duality. Like the winter solstice versus the summer solstice. The darkest, coldest year in the northern hemisphere versus the longest, warmest day of the year, right? Like death and life and everything in between, right? And so the equinoxes would be that in between, that transitional space, right? So this goes into number 4 when I mentioned the hemisphere thing. What is the strangest holiday in terms of weather that I've experienced? This is the solstice. So this is really interesting. In December of 2013, I went with my husband to Chile because that's where he's from. His family and friends all live in Santiago de Chile, the capital of Chile. And we were there for Christmas. We were there so that I could meet my in-laws and meet everybody before we got married, because we got married the following May. So that was the first time in my life that my birthday wasn't on the winter solstice. It was on the summer solstice. I also experienced my first earthquake on my birthday that year. That was kind of cool. So again, that duality and how everything within that duality is interconnected. It's so fascinating how on the same day of the year, depending on the hemisphere you're in, it's the longest, darkest, coldest night, or it's the longest, warmest, sunniest day at the same time. So I got to experience that for the first time. That was really fucking cool. So that was my strangest holiday. How do you view nature or the environment? And I wrote something down here to kind of help me answer this question. So Orion Foxwood, he is so far my favorite witchy author by far. His book, The Candle at the Crossroads and The Flame in the Cauldron, it's old style witchery, lots of hoodoo and conjure and Appalachian folk magic, and it's just awesome. So in his book, The Flame in the Cauldron, he says a really great quote: "Nature is the ultimate grimoire for witchery. Nature is our original ancestor." So, and he defines magic as the art of conscious creation. That's his definition of magic. And I would add to that that I definitely prescribe, or I definitely follow the belief, as above, so below. And if you see part 2 of my Order and Chaos video, you'll kind of understand how you'll see how I understand my place in the universe. So as above, so below, I am nature. Nature is me. Nature is both something that exists outside of me and it exists within me. And in my view, you can replace the word nature with the word universe. I am a universe. The universe is within me. The universe is without me. I am nature. Nature is within me. Nature is without me. So I guess I understand why humans, we create these categories and distinctions between categories, but we have to be careful to remember that those categories and distinctions aren't always the same thing as like some objective reality. Like nature doesn't necessarily exist as something like non-human outside of me kind of thing. So that's how I understand nature. I am nature. Yeah, in a few words. Okay, and last question. How do you think climate change will affect our view of the Wheel of the Year or pagan nature worship? Well, it definitely makes you more aware of it. Having a worldview that doesn't view nature, or doesn't nature as in something outside of outside of humanity. Having a worldview that views nature as just a resource, which is the predominant worldview that we're dealing with, whether it's capitalist or scientific or Christian. It's coming to a point to where even they have to recognize that it's destructive. And so going back to my view of how I am nature, nature's within me and without me, if we destroy nature, we're destroying ourselves, right? So the idea of climate change, it definitely affects our view of how we understand and celebrate these rituals of the Wheel of the Year or the solstice or the equinox. It almost makes them more precious because the way we understand them or the way that we perceive them now could very well change. So, yeah. On that note, that is my environment tag. Thank you, Travis at the Pagan Scholar, for starting this tag, and I would love to see other video responses or to see what people think. So spread the word. Okay, that's my last video for today. Finally. Bye everybody.